Tolerance and patience, they're great virtues to have, but they're not virtues to be exploited. Someone should tell that to the West, especially to the US, Canada and the UK, because the Khalistanis have struck again. Their target, the Indian Consulate in San Francisco. This video shows the building on fire. The local fire brigade was deployed to bring it under control. Thankfully, there was no major damage. All the diplomats are also safe. The US State Department has condemned the arson. Their spokesperson says violence against diplomats or their facilities is a criminal offense. But what are they doing about it? The same consulate was attacked in March this year. Khalistanis broke through barricades and gates. They installed Khalistani flags on the building. Washington condemned that incident as well. But months later, the threat remains and the actions are repeated. It was a security breach in March. It's arson today. I wonder what's next. How long can Indian diplomats live in fear? How many more Indian consulates have to be attacked for the Western governments to actually do something? The fact is, the US government is dragging its feet. They say they're concerned, but in reality, they aren't doing much. Sunday's incident seems to have been a revenge attack. Revenge for what? The killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. He was a Khalistani based in Canada. The Indian government had declared him a terrorist. On the 19th of June, he was gunned down in Vancouver. We don't know who the attackers were or what their motive was. But clearly, it has enraged Khalistanis. Nijjar was the chief of the Khalistani Tiger Force. He also worked with Sikhs for Justice. So these organizations are out with a vengeance. The consulate attack could have been one tactic. Another one is planned for the 8th of July. A so-called Khalistan Freedom Rally. This is being organized in the US, in Canada and in Australia. Look at their posters. They say kill India. They also display the name and picture of the top Indian diplomats in those countries. This is the American poster. Down below, you can see Taranjit Singh Sindhu. He's India's ambassador to the United States of America. These diplomats have been labeled killers of Hardeep Nijjar. India has summoned the Canadian envoy in response. It has also lodged a diplomatic protest. Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar once again had a warning for these countries. He said Khalistani thought is not good for relations. Listen to this.
We have requested our partner countries like Canada, the United States, the United Kingdom and Australia not to give space to the Khalistanis. This will affect our relations.
Now, Canada is clearly the hotspot. The biggest rally will also probably be in Canada. So what is their government doing about this? The foreign minister says the posters are unacceptable. She also said the safety of Indian diplomats will be guaranteed. So very similar to the US statement. But this problem isn't just about security, is it? Yes, the urgent need is security, but the larger problem is the politics. The likes of Canada see Khalistanis as a security threat to Indian diplomats or to Indian facilities. They don't think it's a threat to themselves or to the Indian Republic. And that's the problem here. You know how Pakistan kept talking about good terrorists? Well, this is no different. Canada's government thinks Khalistanis are a vote bank, hence the reluctance to crack down. India has handled this issue with patience and tolerance so far, but how much longer? Indians living abroad are now feeling unsafe. Indian diplomats are being called killers. So New Delhi must draw the red line somewhere because other governments have. The US invaded other countries to capture wanted terrorists. In the process, they killed thousands of innocents. Why not show the same urgency against terrorists targeting India? Well, because of politics. This problem will not disappear just by beefing up security or giving more bodyguards to Indian diplomats. That should be done, yes, but that alone is not enough. You need to target the root of Khalistani separatism and terrorism. You need a broad crackdown to choke this movement, their funding, their groups. But knowing the West, it's not happening soon. For our next story, let's take a quick look at history. The year was 2002. Attack helicopters were hovering over Jenin. It's a city located in the West Bank. On the ground, a fierce battle was unfolding. Israeli soldiers battled Palestinian militants. Citizens were caught in the gunfire. When the smoke cleared, more than 50 people were dead. It was called the Battle of Jenin. It was Israel's biggest operation in the West Bank during the Second Intifada, or the Second Uprising. 2 decades later, it's an eerie deja vu for Jenin. Drones are striking the city's refugee camp. The streets are empty but filled with smoke. The noise of gunfire echoes through the night. On one side, there are Israeli soldiers. On the other, Palestinian militants. And caught in the middle, again, are ordinary residents.
There were strikes and bombs. It was like World War III. Not even like the First World War, a Third World War. They are attacking unarmed people. They are using planes and rockets.
I came yesterday evening to take my sister to my home, but we were stuck. The military vehicles and bulldozers entered the area. This is a criminal enemy.
10 people have been killed, hundreds are injured, many are fleeing the camps. The residents of Jenin are calling it a black day, an attack by the so-called occupation. Israel, on the other hand, defends this as a military operation. It says the Jenin camp was a hub of terrorists.
There's a direct line between Islamic Jihad activity and Iran, funding capabilities, etc., etc. Talking about how long this will last, it could take hours, and it could also take days. We're not here to conquer or hold the ground. When it's finished, we'll be out of there.
The operation started on Monday morning. This was when Israel hit an apartment in this refugee camp. Then came the troops. The IDF, or the Israeli forces, even released a few pictures of the raid, including this one of an underground shaft. They say it was used to store explosive devices. Israel has long maintained that this refugee camp was a hub of militant groups, the likes of Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade.
The IDF launched a comprehensive action against terrorist strongholds in Jenin. In recent months, Jenin has become a safe haven for terrorists. From that safe haven, terrorists perpetrated savage attacks, murdering Israeli civilians. As I speak, our troops are battling the terrorists with unyielding resolve and fortitude while doing everything to avoid civilian casualties.
Palestine, on the other hand, calls this a ruse, an attack on defenseless citizens. It called on other nations for help and protection.
We are again calling the international world to provide urgent international protection to our people and impose penalties against the occupation regime.
The Arab world has responded to this cry. Jordan, for one, slammed the Israeli aggression. So did Egypt, Turkey, and Iran. The US has pleaded for closer cooperation. The United Nations has called for calm, but Israel is defending its actions. What explains this sudden attack on a refugee camp? The city has been a focal point of conflict. There have been raids in the past too, but they were never this violent. So many are calling it a distraction tactic. They say it's Prime Minister Netanyahu's way to make the world forget about protests at home. You see, Israel has been protesting over judicial reforms that he wants to bring in. And these are the biggest protests that the Jewish state has seen ever. These protests have entered their 26th week, but Israelis are not backing down. So are the Jenin raids just a distraction tactic? Prime Minister Netanyahu has been accused of this before, though, of using violence as a distraction. But where does this lead to? Are Israel and Palestine on the brink of another war? And this too has happened in the past multiple times, mostly in Gaza. But now it's playing out in Jenin. The city is part of the West Bank. It is controlled by the Palestinian Authority, or PA. They have administrative and security controls over this region. But it looks like the PA has lost control of the Jenin camp and of the situation. There's large-scale violence. It could lead to more conflicts, more militant groups, or more calls for a two-state solution. It's hard to say how this will end. Israel says the operation is almost over. It's only when the dust settles that the world will see the real impact of this raid. They say beauty lies in the eye of the beholder, but what happens when the beholder doesn't care for beauty? When they only care about control? Well, you end up with the situation plaguing Afghanistan. The Taliban have imposed yet another diktat, another way to restrict women. They've banned hair and beauty salons. This, among other things, was one of the very few remaining means of employment for Afghan women. And a month from now, this too will stop. Here's a report.
The Taliban are up to their old tricks again, finding new ways to make the lives of Afghan women more miserable. The latest in their gender side is the banning of beauty salons. It started last week. The Taliban sent out a text message telling hair and beauty salons that they were on the clock. These businesses have to wind up by the end of the month. Anyone found operating their salons beyond the deadline will suffer dire consequences. Now the question is, why? Well, the Taliban say they'll tell us eventually, once the salons have all shut. So until then, we can't do much but speculate. We should spend this time asking the big picture questions. First, what does this mean for Afghan women? Well, that's another employment avenue out of the window. And it's the end of women-only workspaces for them. Salons reportedly served as a sort of safe haven for Afghan women. It was a place where they could gather without men present. A place free from male chaperones and guardians. That's gone now. The next question we should ask is why this sudden return to form by the Taliban? You see, the Taliban have done this before. During their last stint in power back in the late 1990s, salons were forced to shut down then as well. But when the Taliban took over Afghanistan again in 2021, they had promised to do things differently. They promised the world that this was a new, relatively moderate Taliban. A Taliban 2.0, if you will. That was all rubbish, of course, but the world bought it. And it's the Afghans, especially the women, who are paying the price. Are the Taliban doing this because they feel the global scrutiny shifting away? Have they realized that no one is going to lift a finger to stop them? They've been committing crimes against women ever since they took control in 2021. The Taliban have stopped women from getting an education beyond the 6th grade. They have imposed strict dress codes and chaperone laws, and they keep restricting women's participation in the workforce. The UN has called this systematic repression gender apartheid.
Grave, systematic and institutionalized discrimination against women and girls is at the heart of Taliban ideology and rule, which also gives rise to concerns that they may be responsible for gender apartheid, a serious human rights violation which, although not yet explicitly an international crime, requires further study. We also draw to the Council's attention our deep concern that these serious deprivations of women and girls' fundamental human rights and the harsh enforcement by the de facto authorities of their restrictive measures may constitute the crime against humanity of gender persecution.
The UN wants to study the Taliban's gender apartheid and see if it can be called an international crime. It already calls the Taliban's rule a crime against humanity. And as countries continue to turn a blind eye, things will only get worse for Afghan women. After this latest salon ban, women can now only work as doctors and nurses. And who knows how long that will last. Unless the world starts putting some real pressure on the warlords in Kabul, they will continue to assault the dignity of the women in Afghanistan.
Our last story today is about a cage fight between two billionaires, Twitter owner Elon Musk and Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg. We told you about this last week. The date for the physical fight is still undecided, but in another arena, they're already fighting. Headlines all over the world are talking about Threads. They're calling it the Twitter killer. Threads is a new app by Meta. It's being launched this week to rival Twitter. And Twitter has remained stubbornly irreplaceable thus far, but it faces its fair share of challenges now. So what will become of this face-off? Here's a report.
This is Twitter, a social media company owned by tech billionaire Elon Musk. It's been around since 2006 and has come to mean different things to different people. To some, it's a platform for free speech. To others, it's a pool of hearty controversies. But to Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Meta, Twitter is his Achilles heel. He has long wanted to dislodge the app. He has wanted to provide another central place for online conversation. But he hasn't been able to. Even so, this hasn't stopped him. Now, Meta has teased a new app, and it is singularly aimed at beating Twitter. So much so that it's being called the Twitter killer. Its real name is Threads, and it's connected to Instagram, the social media app also owned by Meta. It is set to be launched this Thursday. It'll function a lot like Twitter. Threads will emphasize on public conversations. It's obvious that tech rivals would launch competing apps, which possess similar qualities and have a showdown in the app stores on our smart devices. But something is worth noting here. Zuckerberg seems to be striking Twitter when it's down. Elon Musk bought Twitter last year. Since then, Twitter's value has plummeted by 2/3. Musk has been playing around with the app's algorithm. Now, Twitter has thrown out content moderation policies, overhauled the verification process. Most recently, it imposed limits in the number of tweets one can read. This effectively made the app unusable after a point, and users became frustrated. So Twitter is clearly facing fresh turbulence, and this has given Zuckerberg an opening to throw his Zucker punch. Will it work? Experts certainly think so.
I think Threads is going to pose a huge threat to Twitter because it's coming from the Meta and Instagram family of apps. Instagram has 2 billion users compared to around 250 million of Twitter, so it's about 10 times bigger already. So if only 1 in 10 Instagram users tries using Threads, it's overtaken Twitter in the blink of an eye.
After all, Meta is the most credible competitor to Twitter. It has deep pockets and an audience of more than 3 billion people who use Facebook, Instagram, or its other apps. But in this tech cage fight, does Twitter stand a chance? It's hard to say. There is certainly potential to recover. Although first, Twitter will have to rebuild what it lost.
I think what it needs to do is start rebuilding what it had, because what it does have, that it still has, is its name and its cachet, especially in certain circles, media, technology. Twitter is still used. So build back more of what it had, and it could potentially have a future ahead.
But considering Elon Musk's self-destructive tendencies, it's tough to imagine how fast Twitter will improve. After all, in Musk's eyes, Twitter is improving. One impulsive decision at a time. The thing is, up till now, Twitter had free rein. It had a monopoly, so it could afford to be callous. But now it faces its biggest threat ever. It'll have to indulge in much more than chaos to attract its disengaged users.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Peru's most active volcano, Ubinas, has reported heavy activity. It shook the region and sent a column of toxic gas into the air. They're set to declare a state of emergency. In Japan, parts of a sea turned an ominous shade of red. This was after a leak at a local beer factory. The supermoon lit up the skies last night. We have images from Latin America where the moon appeared brighter and larger than usual. And finally, what makes the 4th of July significant? It is America's Independence Day. In 1776, the US gained independence from Britain. And speaking of independence, the US shares this day with its colony, the Philippines, which ironically gained freedom from the United States in the year 1946. After 48 years of colonization. We're leaving you with these images. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
48 years of American sovereignty, the men and women of the Philippines received their independence. Reduced to poverty after the Japanese occupation, Manuel Roxas, newly elected office, as a new era of prosperity dawns for the gallant people of the Philippines.